Ozzy Osbourne is an exceptional example. It turns out that his genes make him 6 times more susceptible than the ordinary person to develop an alcohol or drug addiction. Ozzy Osbourne passed away not too long ago, and one question has come up again all throughout the world in the days that have passed. How did he manage to survive for so long, when most people would have passed away years ago? How did a man who drowned his body in drink, drugs, and mayhem for decades continue to perform? Years before to his passing, scholars, when the Prince of Darkness's DNA was ultimately sequenced, they didn't anticipate discovering anything remarkable. Rather, the findings astounded geneticists and exposed biological peculiarities that scientists are now unable to understand. One researcher famously mumbled, "This is impossible." His final chapter now has the ideal caption because of that reaction, because Ozzy's genome contained hints about his energies, cravings, resiliency, and even remnants of his ancient ancestry that distinguished him from the majority of modern humans. What researchers uncovered in Ozzy Osbourne's DNA shows his genuine identity, and it's not what anyone expected. The evil prince walks into the laboratory. No one anticipated what Ozzy Osbourne's blood would show when it arrived at the lab, before the data began throwing forth oddities they could not understand. Cofactor genomics scientists believed they were performing a routine sequencing. Mutation after mutation and odd gene variants that weren't found in any human database were identified by the algorithm. According to reports, one researcher mumbled, "This can't be right," as they leaned back in shock. Another conducted the test once more. The outcome was the same. The way Ozzy's DNA behaved was different from everyone else's. Sequences related to dopamine control, metabolism, and nerve communication displayed changes that are uncommon in normal persons. It was the kind of crazy discovery that caused experts to pause and reconsider the limits of human potential. His genome appeared to be almost designed for extremes, designed to withstand punishment that should end a life, to rewire itself under chemical bombardment, and to handle chemicals that would kill most people. It was startling enough. But the second revelation was more stranger. Researchers found pieces of old DNA hidden inside his chromosomes as they traced some of his lineage. One little area on chromosome 10 exhibited unambiguous traces of Neanderthal heritage. It was nearly difficult for the squad. It is a true genetic signature, not a symbol or a metaphor. According to current genetics, Ozzy Osbourne had a genetic code that directly connected him to an extinct early human species. The group checked again. The inaccuracy was not caused by contamination. The information contained the notion that this man, who had endured decades of constant touring, near-fatal crashes and overdoses, might have inherited something primordial and ancient, seemed less ridiculous all of a sudden. In the scientific community, news swiftly circulated. Geneticists joked that Ozzy might be a new branch of the human tree, part modern Homo sapiens, part rock and roll Neanderthal. But there was real interest beneath the humor. His DNA was more than simply an interesting fact. It provided insight into how the human body changes, adapts, and occasionally defies all known biological laws. What more was buried in those twisting spirals of code? Why did the chemistry of his brain react differently to booze and drugs? Could one man's survival of his own turmoil be explained by the same genes that once enabled ancient humans to endure a harsh environment? The legend of Ozzy Osbourne would become something far more bizarre and human than anyone could have imagined, thanks to the answers hidden in those minuscule patterns. Ozzy's code contains a genome torture test. Cofactor Genomics and Gnome Incorporated had a straightforward objective when they chose to sequence Ozzy Osbourne's whole genome, find out whether decades of harsh living had left a genetic footprint. Although this kind of testing on celebrities was not new, this instance was unique. Ozzy's case was about scientific curiosity. How had this man survived numerous instances that ought to have ended his life? In July 2010, Ozzy gave a vial of blood to start the procedure. Gnome, a Cambridge-based analysis firm, processed the data while Cofactor Genomics handled the sequencing. When the data came back, they did not make clinical sense. The 61-year-old rock star's genome was not what the scientists were looking at. They were gazing at a live paradox. Many of the uncommon variations found in Ozzy's DNA have never been seen before. Some influenced his neurological system and dopamine control, while others had an impact on how his body processed alcohol and narcotics. These were also not slight differences. They were remarkably different, as though his nature had developed special defenses against decades of chemical warfare. One notable mutation was found close to the ADH4 gene, which is essential for the metabolism of alcohol. This changed how much of a certain enzyme his body generated, allowing him to burn through liquor differently from other people, not painlessly, but faster and with less severe harm. The CLT clone gene, which is related to nerve cell communication, also showed an abnormality. A unique protein that may affect mobility, impulse control, addiction, and even creativity was produced by the variation Ozzy carried. It appeared that Ozzy's brain was wired for both genius and mayhem, a system designed to be stimulating but constantly on the verge of overload. Additionally, he had a variation in dopamine signaling, the neurotransmitter responsible for reward, high-risk behavior, and motivation. It clarified why Ozzy maintained his extraordinary vitality and inventiveness in spite of his advanced age and lengthy background of maltreatment. However, it also provided hints as to why he had always been attracted to drugs that boosted that dopamine release. Many people with identical variants have a tendency to engage in high-risk, high-reward behaviors, according to scientists. Addiction, performance, celebrity, and the unwavering will to keep going were all manifestations of that euphoria for Ozzy. Ozzy was quite interested in the findings when the research team sat down with him to talk about them. He was looking for real solutions rather than justifications for his history. "I have consumed so much alcohol that there is no conceivable medical explanation for my continued existence," he said in writing for the Sunday Times. "Maybe my DNA could reveal why." It did, to a startling extent. On several levels, his genome demonstrated resiliency. Genes that control detoxification and cell repair seemed abnormally active, indicating that his body might be more capable than usual of repairing minor damage before it proved fatal. That does not imply that he was unbeatable, but it did indicate a level of biological efficiency that is uncommon. However, there were limitations to the results. None of the scientists asserted that his survival was exclusively due to his DNA. Environment, luck, and lifestyle all have an impact. His genetic code did, however, undoubtedly contain a number of uncommon genetic advantages. A troubling question was also brought up by the findings. If DNA may drive addiction, inventiveness, or risk-taking, where does personal responsibility begin or end? The researchers were unambiguous. Genetics may alter the odds, they explained. However, they don't decide the result. The environment, experience, and human willpower continue to be considerably more potent influences. Despite this scientific caution, Ozzy's genome provided a unique window into the relationship between personality and biology. The characteristics that defined him might be explained by the same biochemical peculiarities that aided in his survival. He was the Prince of Darkness due to his limitless energy, instability, and magnetism. What his DNA showed about the boundaries of science itself was perhaps the most intriguing of all. The specialists were unable to identify a single mutation that defined Ozzy Osbourne's identity despite thousands of datasets. Neither his intellect nor his insanity could be explained by a single variation of the rockstar gene. Instead, they discovered intricacy, a web of characteristics, relationships, and enigmas that science is just starting to comprehend. The more they dug, the more the evidence seemed to point to something even more bizarre: a relationship between his genetic resilience and his ancient pedigree. They would soon learn that this connection dated back tens of thousands of years, to a time when there were other species on Earth besides humans. And both Ozzy and the scientific community would be shocked by that discovery. The Neanderthal in the mirror. Researchers anticipated a simple genetic map of European origin when they used Ozzy Osbourne's DNA to trace his lineage. Instead, they unearthed something that left them speechless. Tucked deep within his genome, there was a piece of genetic material on chromosome 10 that was completely unrelated to modern humans. It was Neanderthal property. The scientists initially believed it might be a mistake. Sometimes cross-contamination occurs during genome sequencing, and they wanted to be sure with a subject as well known as Ozzy. The raw data was rechecked. The order persisted. The markers were real. One of the most ludicrous characters in rock history, Ozzy Osbourne, has the distinct genetic markers of a long-extinct early human race. In actuality, a large number of individuals of European and Asian ancestry have trace amounts of Neanderthal DNA, typically ranging from 1 to 4%. For Ozzy, however, the revelation felt uncannily appropriate. It turned out that a man with a literal remnant of primordial hardiness in his blood had withstood decades of extremes. The possibility that Ozzy's body was still using antiquated software was jokingly raised by one of the researchers. Despite being offered in jest, that remark had a fascinating scientific potential. Characteristics related to immunological response, metabolism, and pain tolerance are associated with specific Neanderthal genes. For a species that faced harsh winters, limited food supplies, and ongoing physical adversity, they served as survival tools. Humans still have some of those genes, which help us fight off illnesses or digest fat in distinct ways. Researchers hypothesized that Ozzy's genetic composition might contain variations that, in the distant past, enabled Neanderthals to withstand harsh environments. Those similar variations might have helped Ozzy withstand his own extremes in the modern world. The idea that the man who appeared to represent chaos might actually be the result of evolutionary perseverance was a beautiful turn of events. He was described by the media as a leather-clad Neanderthal or as partially caveman. As usual, Ozzy thought it was amusing. He chuckled when he was informed that he had some Neanderthal ancestry, saying, "That makes sense. I always knew I wasn't completely human." However, underneath the comedy lay a deeper meaning. The finding closed the gap between resilience in the current world and survival in the ancient world. It alluded to the way evolution subtly molds us by retaining traces of our ancestors' DNA in us. Those pieces had somehow found a stage in Ozzy's case. The Neanderthal connection also rekindled curiosity in human creativity. The question of whether rhythm, music, and creative expression are exclusively human characteristics or have deeper evolutionary foundations has long been a source of discussion among scientists. Could Ozzy's musical instincts have been influenced by some ancient circuitry if his genome contained remnants of an earlier species? Although it cannot be proven, it is an intriguing question. After all, music is as basic as fire. The public's response also captivated the scientists. All of a sudden, genetics was a popular culture phenomenon as well as an academic discipline. Scientific journals were not being read. They were reading rock publications about DNA. It felt real to think that our ancestry still shaped our personalities, behaviors, and even our ability to survive. And Ozzy ended up serving as that revelation's odd spokesperson. For a long time, we thought that Neanderthals had no descendants, but it turns out some of their DNA lives on in us, said Nathan Pearson of Nome, who was explaining the findings. The story was not that Ozzy was a mutation or an abnormality. Rather, it was that she simply stood out. It was that his genome illuminated the essence of humanity, a patchwork of contemporary versions and historical battles. A living reminder of how to survive. The message became increasingly obvious the more they examined his DNA data. The DNA of Ozzy Osbourne was not an anomaly. It served as a mirror reflecting the tenacity that has sustained our species over thousands of years of upheaval and transformation. Even though his life was wild, it proved that sometimes the most unexpected survival have the most ancient instincts. The music in his DNA, addiction, and survival. Scientists started making connections between Ozzy Osbourne's genetics and his life once they verified the anomalies in his genes. Fans and medical professionals have been wondering for decades how he survived years of drug misuse, injuries, and non-stop touring. While the genomic research highlighted deeper concerns about the connection between DNA, addiction, and creativity, it also offered some solutions. The way Ozzy's body metabolized alcohol and narcotics was the first hint. His liver produced enzymes that could break down alcohol at an exceptionally high pace due to a specific mutation near the ADH4 gene. This could help explain why he tolerated quantities that would poison most people, but it wouldn't make him immune to the harmful effects of drinking. His metabolism seems to have adapted to operate in survival mode, eliminating poisons more quickly than anyone could have predicted. Additionally, scientists discovered abnormalities in Ozzy's DNA that were connected to the brain's regulation of dopamine, the neurotransmitter that drives motivation and pleasure. Dopamine is also a major contributor to addiction. To compensate for their decreased dopamine production, people frequently look for outside stimulation. People who process it too quickly can seek for continuous highs in an attempt to keep their enthusiasm levels high. According to Ozzy's genetic map, his dopamine system functioned differently, which may have fueled both his extreme behavior and musical genius. One of the experts who examined Ozzy's genome, Nathan Pearson, gave a straightforward explanation. His DNA has several variations related to the brain's dopamine processing. Although that may sound technical, it actually meant that his brain was built for intensity. Every risk, every song, and every performance had the same physiological high as a drug surge. It's possible that his artistic talent and addictive tendencies originated from the same biological root. However, it's possible that the same genes that enabled him to overcome his addictions also influenced his personality in other ways. Research indicates that factors affecting serotonin and dopamine levels may be involved in mood swings, restlessness, and impulsivity. These characteristics shaped Ozzy's public persona. He was always captivating, erratic, frequently humorous, and occasionally chaotic. Fans witnessed more than simply a show on stage. It was biology at work. The scientists were careful not to make sweeping judgments. They emphasized that destiny is not determined solely by DNA. Genes interact with the environment, trauma, and individual choices to determine behavior. Nevertheless, everyone was captivated by the notion that his survival was etched, in part at least, into his code. His genetic makeup revealed a man built to last. Additionally, the results compelled researchers to address a novel query. Is there a hereditary component to musical talent? Ozzy's genome showed changes related to neuronal connection and rhythm processing, but did not identify a music gene. His CLTCL gene variation may have an impact on timing and coordination, since it altered the way nerve cells transmit messages. Although there isn't any scientific evidence that these genes produce musicians, several academics think they can improve memory, rhythm perception, and sensitivity to sound. All of this seemed to amuse Ozzy himself. He once remarked, "Perhaps I'm an evolution experiment." He was, in a sense, correct. Decades of abuse had put his body to the test, and his psyche to the breaking point. Both, however, continued to operate. In addition to revealing what made Ozzy unique, the sequencing project demonstrated how the human body can adjust to harsh situations. Ozzy's genome turned into a resilience case study for the researchers. Fans saw it as evidence that their hero wasn't just fortunate. A tale of perseverance that predates rock and roll itself could be found somewhere in those knotted DNA strands. His genes demonstrated how biology and identity can coexist, but they did not justify his past or his addictions. His body contained a record of creativity, addiction, and survival in every cell. Maybe that's why Ozzy Osbourne is so enigmatic. A guy who, long before he ever uttered a song, was driven by instincts ingrained in his DNA and lived on the brink of genius and disaster. The study of immortality. Scientists realized they were studying much more than the peculiar biology of a single rock star as the research of Ozzy Osbourne's genome gained momentum. His DNA served as a blueprint for comprehending human resiliency. It seemed as though the answer to a subject that medicine had been pursuing for ages was contained in his genetic code. How can some people live through things that ought to kill them? The GNOME team started comparing Ozzy's findings with genetic information from individuals who had recovered from serious illnesses or lived exceptionally long lives. They observed that the two groups shared some of the same genetic variants. The body's capacity to heal cells, fend off poisons, and control stress hormones was frequently impacted by these variations. Several of these resistance markers were dispersed like concealed armor across several chromosomes in Ozzy's DNA. Genes linked to detoxification and cellular repair were the subject of one particularly intriguing discovery. The speed at which the body eliminates damaged cells and produces new ones is controlled by these genes. Long-term use of drugs or alcohol weakens the healing system in most persons. Damage builds up until the body is unable to handle it any longer. However, Ozzy's genetic data indicated that his repair systems were more effective. In a sense, his body recovered from his disarray more quickly than it could have destroyed itself. The scientists partially laughed when reporters questioned them about whether Ozzy's genome contained the key to immortality. They clarified that a true immortality gene did not exist, but possibly even more interesting was what Ozzy had. He survived through continuous biological warfare thanks to a network of genetic advantages. His cells responded more quickly, his brain adjusted to the pressure, and his liver worked overtime. Researchers studying addiction and longevity in pharmaceuticals were interested in the findings. His DNA had turned into a living laboratory, and if the same genetic characteristics that kept Ozzy alive could be comprehended and reproduced, they might one day aid in the development of novel treatments for organ injury or addiction recovery. Despite the scientific explanation, the discovery nonetheless had a poetic quality. Death had been an afterthought for Ozzy Osbourne for the majority of his life, his biology proven him correct for decades. It's evident, even now, after his death, that he lived a lifetime pushing boundaries that would have prevented nearly everyone else. Eventually, the GNOME team wrote a report on what they dubbed adaptive genetic outliers, which are people whose biology enables them to live longer than expected. The most well-known example was Ozzy. However, Ozzy minimized the evidence while scientists applauded it. He once joked, "I'm not indestructible. My genes have just been lucky to me." However, his DNA made the public face an unsettling reality regarding evolution. Variability has always been essential to human survival. Just as some people are more susceptible to addiction or despair, others are inherently more resilient to illnesses or environmental pollutants. Ozzy's DNA demonstrated how these qualities can coexist in a single individual, balancing endurance and destruction. It also made it difficult to distinguish between fate and science. How much of our destiny is predetermined by us? Do we all have the blueprint for our own survival? Or, worse, our own demise? Long after the headlines had faded, these kinds of questions persisted because of Ozzy's genome. When Ozzy smiled and responded, "I'm just happy I'm still here to talk about it," in his own way, he was correct when asked years before his death what he thought about being a part of genetic history. Invincibility was never the theme of his story. It was a matter of survival, and the best human ability is survival. Perhaps that was why his DNA was so important. It served as a reminder that evolution is far from over. It persists within each of us, influencing how we live, adjust, and persevere. In Ozzy's case, it sang through him, carrying with it every scream, every note, and every unstoppable heartbeat. What do you believe your own genome might be concealing about your resiliency or skills if the DNA of a single individual can uncover evidence of ancient Neanderthals and account for decades of survival in the face of overwhelming adversity? Leave a comment below with your opinions. I appreciate you watching. See you at the following one.